Hi everybody, this is Laura, City Scrapper. Thank you so much for joining me on my channel. Today I have a layout that I made for a Punched Out Thursday to Die For. In a Punched Out Thursday to Die For, we use our punches and our dies to create scrapbooking layouts. I thought it would be fun to make a Halloween layout, and it did not turn out to be as fun as I thought, at least at the beginning, but everything worked out okay in the end. The first thing I did was to gut a piece of Authentique Halloween themed pattern paper. That's the thin off-white border that you see here. And I mounted it on top of a piece of pattern paper that I knew that I would use. So I used those papers to layer papers on top of. And I did a terrible job attaching it down to that larger piece of paper. At first, the paper was wavy and it was definitely crooked, and you could see some of the purple paper along the edge of the off-white paper, but I figured that was easy enough to fix once I got the gutted piece of paper to lay flat. Later on, I just trimmed off the excess purple paper from the edge. Sorry about the black paper. It seems to be causing my camera to go a little wonky, but I'm going to be covering it up right now so that won't happen again. I'm not sure why it has that effect. I put down a piece of black solid cardstock. I made that a little bit smaller than the gutted piece of paper, and then I attached a really pretty pattern paper down on top of that. That all went pretty well. Now I'm going to add a circle to the middle of my layout. I'm using the rest of the pattern paper that I gutted for the edge to make this circle, and I use my Creative Memories circle cutter. The circle is going to go in the center of the page. I also wanted to include this strip of orange paper on the right-hand side of the layout. All of these pattern papers are from different Authentique Halloween themed paper pads. I love the way all of these papers kind of go together, even though they're from different collections. I used an EK Success border punch, and I punched out what looks to me like an iron gate. It just looked kind of like a Halloween themed punch to me, even though it could also be used for other things. And I layered that on the right hand side of the strip, and then I put a small strip of black paper behind that strip on the left hand side. I forgot to ink the edges, so I had to peel up the strip of paper in order to ink the edges of the orange paper. I'm using black soot distress ink, and I forget to ink a lot of things on this page. I have to do a lot of peeling up of elements that I've already attached down on this layout. I didn't want to ruin the border strip, so I just kind of ran my dauber along the edge of the orange strip of paper. It didn't have the same effect as inking the edge, but you could see a little bit of the black soot ink on the right-hand edge of that strip of orange paper. I want to add some more orange on the left-hand side of the layout, so I again use my Creative Memories circle cutter, and I cut out a circle that's just a tiny bit bigger than that off-white circle that I cut out. I inked the edge of the orange paper. That is something that I did remember to do. And then I attached the off-white piece of paper down to the orange piece of paper, remembering to ink the edges of that as well. Wish I could say that for everything on the layout. So then I used some ATG adhesive, and then I attached it down to the layout. I didn't attach down the orange strip of paper on the left-hand side because I knew I wanted to tuck that circle underneath it. I'm using a photo of both of my daughters that was taken in Salem, Massachusetts by the Bewitched statue. This was taken in 2017, and just looking at the photo, I'm laughing at how few people there were in the background. Salem has gotten to be a very, very crowded place in October, and it was definitely not as bad back then, but we still go because I just love it there. I love the energy there in October, even if it has gotten to be a little bit crazy. And this photo is from an album that's almost done. I only have a few layouts left, so I really want to try to get this album done for both of my daughters. It seems like I just kind of stopped doing the albums when I was right at the finish line, so I'm going to try to get both of them done soon. Here are a couple of mistakes I made. First of all, that orange paper is so crooked. The writing on it is so slanted. And then the off-white piece of paper that I put on top of it, I didn't center it correctly. And then I was also thinking that piece of paper looked just a little bit too boring, so I decided instead to use this piece of paper. I cut it actually a little bit smaller than the paper that was there before that because I wanted to see more of the orange border. So even though I made a few errors, I feel like they were corrected when I peeled off that other piece of paper, which I didn't include the footage of. Sometimes it could be a nasty sight to see what the layout looks like when you're ripping something off, but you really can't see that the orange paper or the writing on the orange paper is crooked. So I think that at this point, everything is going a little bit better. I added a strip of striped paper to the right-hand side of that larger orange strip. I distressed the edges of this paper using my scissors. The scissors that I have there, the Cutter B scissors that are off to the right, those are kind of my designated distressing scissors. There's something kind of off with them. They don't align right, but they are perfect to use for distressing. I further distressed that strip of paper by bending up some of the edges. I mounted my photo on some off-white pattern paper. I chose off-white because there is very little white on this layout. There is going to be just a little bit, but I thought it would look a little more subtle if there was off-white around it. That was another piece of the Authentique pattern paper. And then I chose another piece of darker paper to put behind it. That way it would have contrast with the rest of the page. Otherwise, it would just kind of match in too much with the circle on the background. And once again, I'm distressing the edges of the black dotted piece of paper that I have as a mat. I wanted to pop up my photo on some foam, but before I did that, I wanted to reinforce the photo. So I had a circle that's a thick white cardstock. So I cut it to size, but it wasn't quite big enough. So I took some little scraps of paper and I put them in the corners. And I feel like this was kind of an odd thing for me to do because I have plenty of this thick paper. I really didn't need to piece it together. And there's nothing wrong with that. I didn't waste paper, but I don't think it's something I would normally do. I just wasn't thinking the way I normally think the night that I made this layout. I'm not really sure why. Now that I've reinforced my photo, I am popping it up on some foam. I'm using some fun foam. I love the fun foam that has adhesive on one side. I think it makes it so much more convenient to work with. I cut it to size, and then I use some ATG adhesive to attach the photo down to the background. I'm noticing as I'm doing this voiceover that I did not put the lid back on my Distress ink for quite a while. I don't know how I didn't notice that. Sometimes when I'm working, I get into a certain mindset. I don't notice what's around me. I'll leave all kinds of crazy things next to my mat, and I don't necessarily clean up as I go along. Sometimes I do, especially if the layout's not turning out so well, because then I kind of need my space to be cleaner. It just helps me feel calmer. I don't know if any of you can relate to that. But in this case, I finally realized that the lid was off of my ink. I put the lid back on, and now I'm adding some photo corners. I used EK Success scalloped photo corner punch, and I punched them out, inked the edges, and attached them down. So I realized that I did not ink the edges of this strip of paper, and it really was noticeable, especially since I distressed the edges. So I had to go back, peel up the strip, and put it back down again. But in the end, you can't tell that I did that, so it all worked out. And I didn't rip the strip of paper, which I was kind of surprised about. I didn't feel like I had used enough dies or punches, so I went into my stash of dies and I found a spider web corner die, and I also found this fence, and I thought that these would be perfect for this layout. So for the fence, I cut it once out of some darker wood grained paper that had little hints of orange in it, and I also cut it out of black. And then for the spider web corners, I cut them out of black, and then I cut them again out of a brighter orange. And I'm layering the brighter color or the lighter color on top of the black die cut and offsetting them a little. And that's for all three of the die cuts that I am going to be using on the layout. Using gel glue, I attach down those spider web corners. I like the way they are very delicate, and I think that you can see them, but they are not super prominent on the page, and I kind of liked that about them. Next, I placed the fence to the left of the photo. I used just a little bit of ATG adhesive to attach this down because I know me, and chances are I will probably move this around at least a little bit. But I knew that I wanted to tuck it underneath the photo, and I knew I wanted it to go a little bit past the circle. Then I started digging through a lot of my Halloween stickers. I wanted to have a witch theme to the embellishments on the page, even though Bewitched is not your typical witch. I felt that because it's a Halloween / Salem layout, I wanted to kind of play up the more traditional witch look. So I used a Tim Holtz piece of chipboard. They're called quote chips. It said The Witching Hour. Earlier, I inked the edges of it, and I'm using that as my title. I attached it down at the bottom of the page. I found some bats. I always like to include bats on Halloween layouts, and I placed them in the part of the layout where there's pattern paper, so you really can't see them so well. And then I noticed that on this little variety pack from Making Memories, this has got to be at least 10 years old. It's definitely an older piece. I found that there were quite a few embellishments. There were some jewels in black and orange, so that was perfect for this layout. I put the orange jewels on the 4 photo corners and on either side of the title. There was also a piece of black and orange twine in that Making Memories pack, and I thought that it might look nice if I tied it around the layout. I thought the best place for it would be over that strip of paper that I have on the right-hand side of the layout, and I really liked the way that looked. I tied it in a bow. Earlier, I added a crystal ball. I added a jack-o'-lantern and a cat. Those are all Recollections stickers, as are the bats. Those are from the same pack as the jack-o'-lantern. And I also added a witch's hat to the upper right-hand corner. At first, I wasn't going to use that witch's hat because it had a purple and a really bright yellow embellishment on it, but I realized I could just peel that off, and then I end up making my own embellishments for the hat. In one of the Jolee's sticker packs, I found these 2 tags. They were layered on top of each other, and there was a hole punched in the top of the embellishment, and I thought that that might look nice if I threaded the twine through it and then retied the bow, and I do like the way that looks on the right-hand side of the layout. Now I'm using some scraps of pattern paper, and I'm cutting a buckle for the witch's hat, and I'm, for some reason, using really big scissors to try to cut this really little tiny piece, but shockingly, it did work out. I folded a little tiny piece of paper in half, and then I cut a square out of it, and then I cut a smaller square in the center so it would look like a buckle. And then I don't know what you call the part that goes around the hat and through the buckle, but I cut that out of some pattern paper as well. I cut along the edge of a circle so it would look a little bit rounded. I inked the edges of both of those pieces, and then I attached them down to the witch's hat. And even though those papers that I added to the hat are so small, I think that they help to tie the hat into the rest of the layout, and they also break up that very large area that's all the same color. So now I think the witch's hat has the same mood and feel as the rest of the layout. I added a witch's broom. That was an embellishment that was in my stash. I'm not really sure what brand that is. And then I wanted to add another jack-o'-lantern, but all the jack-o'-lanterns had green stems, and I didn't have any green on the layout, and I didn't think it was a good time to introduce another color. So I took my black Sharpie and I colored in the stem so it would be black like the other jack-o'-lantern on the page. Now it's the next day, and I'm looking at the layout with fresh eyes, and I decided that I needed to move those bats down a little bit so that you would be able to see them. I also felt that the fence should have been a little bit lower on that circle. There were a lot of things that were attached to the fence, but I did manage to get it off the page. There was a slight tear of the pattern paper that makes up the circle, but I was able to layer the cat on top of that little tear. The jack-o'-lantern was very difficult to remove from the page. It had some very strong adhesive on it, but I was able to lift it up. And then I was thinking that that smaller pumpkin that I colored the stem on, it just was a different color than the other jack-o'-lantern, and I also needed some orange in the cluster on the upper right-hand corner, so I decided to move it over. I was also thinking that as much as I love that orange strip on the right, it is very eye-catching, and maybe there's a little bit too much orange there. So I decided to cut out a piece of black and off-white paper and add a banner of that on the right-hand side. I used some jewels. I put some small jewels on either side of that banner I just put down. And then I used some very, very tiny ones, and I added those to those spider web photo corners. And that was the last touch. And thank goodness I got this layout done. And here are some close-ups. Please don't forget to check out the videos of my friends Sonia, Kathy, and Ronnie Sue. They are amazing scrapbookers, and I think you'll really enjoy checking out not only Punched Out Thursday to Die For, but the other videos that are on their channels as well. I hope you have a fantastic day. I hope you enjoyed this fun Halloween layout, and I hope to see you again soon. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.